The harsh summer sun beat down mercilessly on the small wooden church in Willow Creek, Montana Territory. As Clara Montgomery stood alone at the altar in 1876, her heart sinking with each passing minute. The carefully arranged wildflowers she had placed on the empty pews that morning had wilted in the heat, much like her hopes of becoming a bride that day. "I reckon he ain't coming, Miss Montgomery," Sheriff Davies said gently, removing his hat as he approached her. His weathered face showed genuine concern beneath his gray mustache. "Been 3 hours now," Clara nodded, struggling to maintain her composure. At 22, she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd corresponded with for nearly a year. Harold Jenkins, a shopkeeper who had painted such beautiful pictures of their future together in his letters, had failed to appear on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "Perhaps there's been an accident," she offered weakly, smoothing the simple white dress she had sewn herself. The sheriff exchanged a knowing glance with Reverend Miller. "I rode out to his place myself, miss. The shop's locked up tight and looks to me like he cleared out sometime yesterday, left a fair amount of debts behind too." The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. She had spent every penny she had on the journey west, selling her late parents' home and belongings for the promise of a new life. Now she stood abandoned in a frontier town where she knew no one, with nowhere to go and nothing but the clothes she wore. "I'm mighty sorry, miss," the Reverend said, closing his Bible. "If it's any consolation, you're welcome to stay at my home tonight. My wife would be happy for the company." Clara thanked him but declined. Her pride was wounded enough without becoming an immediate charity case. "I'll take a room at the boarding house until I can sort things out." As the small gathering of curious townsfolk dispersed, Clara remained in the empty church, trying to piece together what had happened. Harold's letters, full of tenderness and promises, had seemed so sincere. Had it all been a cruel deception from the beginning? The possibility that he had never intended to marry her, that he had perhaps even used her journey as cover for his own escape from creditors, was almost too painful to consider. When she finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, Clara was startled to see a lone figure leaning against the hitching post. A tall man with broad shoulders stood beside a chestnut mare, studying her with intense blue eyes under the brim of a worn Stetson. His appearance was rugged yet neat, dusty riding clothes but a freshly shaven face, sun-bronzed and weathered by the elements. "Madam," he said simply, nodding in acknowledgement. "Sir," she replied, uncertain why he remained when the others had gone. "Name's Samuel Yates. Folks call me Sam." He straightened up, and Clara noted how he carried himself with quiet confidence. "I heard what happened. Thought you might need this." From behind his back, he produced a single perfect wild rose, its deep crimson petals still glistening with morning dew. The simple gesture, so unexpected and kind, caused tears to spring to Clara's eyes. "It ain't much," he said softly, suddenly looking unsure of himself. "But no bride should stand at an altar without at least one flower." Clara accepted the rose with trembling fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Yates." "That's very kind. Got a wagon outside of town," he continued, adjusting his hat. "I'm heading back to my ranch about 20 miles north. If you need work, I could use some help. My sister's been running the household, but she's expecting and could use an extra pair of hands." Clara hesitated, studying the man before her. Employment was exactly what she needed, but she'd learned her lesson about trusting strangers too quickly. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel added, "Reverend Miller knows me. Been in these parts 15 years now. You can ask about me in town." "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Yates," Clara said carefully, "but I should consider all my options before making any decisions." He nodded, accepting her caution. "Fair enough. I'll be at the general store loading supplies for another hour if you decide you're interested." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Yates," Clara called after him. When he turned back, she asked the question burning in her mind. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" Something flickered across his face, a memory, perhaps, before he answered. "5 years back, I was caught in a blizzard miles from shelter. Stranger took me in, saved my life. Reckon we all need help sometimes." With that, he mounted his horse and rode toward the main street, leaving Clara holding the wild rose and wondering if this unexpected encounter might be the first step towards salvaging her shattered dreams. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Clara made her way to Willow Creek's only hotel. The Prairie Rose was a modest two-story building with peeling paint and creaking floorboards, but it was clean and well kept. The proprietress, Mrs. Holliday, a plump woman with kind eyes, listened sympathetically to Clara's predicament. "That Jenkins fellow always struck me as slippery," she said, shaking her head. "You ain't the first Eastern lady to come west for a husband and find disappointment instead." Clara paid for 2 nights with what little money she had left. In her sparse room, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and carefully laid out her remaining funds. The amount was disheartening, barely enough for a week's board, let alone passage back east. After washing the dust from her face, Clara changed out of her wedding dress into her only other outfit, a practical blue skirt and white blouse. She tucked the wild rose Samuel had given her into a small book of poetry, her one indulgence when packing for the journey west. Clara spent the next hour visiting the town's few businesses, inquiring about employment. The saloon offered her work immediately, but the leering gaze of the owner made her decline. The general store had no positions available, nor did the small dress shop. By the time she reached the end of the main street, Clara found herself outside Miller's Mercantile, where she spotted Samuel Yates loading supplies into a wagon. She watched him for a moment, noting the methodical way he worked. There was something reassuring about his deliberate movements, the careful attention he paid to securing each crate and sack. Taking a deep breath, Clara approached him. "Mr. Yates," he turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before he nodded in greeting. "Miss Montgomery." "I've been considering your offer," she said, summoning her courage. "Would you tell me more about the position?" Samuel wiped his hands on a kerchief and leaned against his wagon. "It's straightforward enough, cooking, cleaning, helping my sister with household matters. The ranch isn't grand, but it's growing. Got about 60 head of cattle, some horses. We built a proper house last year to replace the cabin." "And your sister? She's expecting, you said." "Rebecca's due in about 3 months. Her husband Tom helps with the ranch work, but with the baby coming." He trailed off, then added, "We'd provide room and board plus $15 a month." It was a fair wage for such work, and the prospect of immediate employment was appealing. Still, Clara needed reassurance. "I spoke with Reverend Miller," she said. "He spoke highly of you." Samuel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Did he now?" "Well, I reckon the Reverend's a good judge of character." Clara made her decision. "I accept your offer, Mr. Yates, with one condition. If the arrangement doesn't suit either of us after a month, I'd appreciate help returning to town." "Seems reasonable," Samuel agreed, extending his hand. "We have ourselves an accord, Miss Montgomery." Clara shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. His grip was firm but gentle, and something about the brief contact made her cheeks warm slightly. "I'll gather my things and meet you back here," she said, withdrawing her hand perhaps a bit too quickly. An hour later, Clara sat beside Samuel on the wagon bench, her small trunk secured in the back among the supplies. As they left Willow Creek behind, she felt both apprehension and relief. The town that had witnessed her humiliation disappeared behind them as they traveled north along a rutted dirt road. The landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in prairie grass, occasional stands of cottonwood trees marking the paths of creeks, and in the distance, the dark smudge of mountains against the sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. "It's breathtaking," Clara murmured, almost to herself. Samuel glanced at her, then back to the horizon. "Takes some getting used to, all this space. Some folks find it too lonely." "And you?" Clara asked. "Do you find it lonely?" He considered her question for a long moment. "Not lonely. Peaceful. Out here a man can hear himself think." After a pause, he added, "Though I reckon Rebecca will be glad for another woman to talk to, not much for conversation myself." Indeed, Samuel seemed content with silence. Unlike most men Clara had known who felt compelled to fill every quiet moment with chatter. It was refreshing in its way, though it left her with ample time to worry about what lay ahead. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Samuel pointed toward a distant rise. "That's Yates' ranch land from here to the foothills. House is just beyond that rise by the creek." Clara marveled at the vastness of it. "How did you come to settle here?" "Came west after the war between the states," Samuel explained. "Wasn't much left for me in Virginia. Worked as a trail hand, saved every penny, bought this land when the territory opened it up for settlement." "You fought in the war?" Clara asked, curious about this man who was now her employer. Samuel nodded, his expression growing distant. "Confederate cavalry. Not something I'm proud of these days, but I was young and followed where I was led." He fell silent again, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. Clara respected his reticence and turned her attention back to the landscape. As they crested the rise, a small valley opened before them. Nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills sat a two-story wooden house, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. A creek meandered through the property, its banks lined with willows and cottonwoods. "It's lovely," Clara said sincerely. Samuel's expression softened with pride. "Built it all from nothing, took time, but it's home." As they approached, a woman appeared on the porch, waving enthusiastically. Even from a distance, Clara could see she was heavy with child. Beside her stood a tall, lanky man who raised his hand in greeting. "Rebecca and Tom," Samuel explained unnecessarily. "Told them I might be bringing someone back." When they reached the house, Rebecca Yates hurried down the steps as quickly as her condition allowed. She was a pretty woman with the same striking blue eyes as her brother, though her hair was several shades lighter than Samuel's dark brown. "Thank goodness," she exclaimed, embracing Clara as if they were old friends. "I've been praying Sam would find someone suitable. I'm Rebecca, and this is my husband, Tom." "Clara Montgomery," Clara replied, somewhat overwhelmed by the warm welcome. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." "Sam told us what happened in town," Rebecca said, her expression sympathetic. "That Harold Jenkins is a spineless weasel who didn't deserve you anyway." "Rebecca," Samuel warned, but his sister waved him off. "It's true and everyone knows it. Now come inside, Clara. You must be exhausted and dinner's nearly ready." The interior of the Yates home was surprisingly comfortable and well furnished. The main floor consisted of a spacious kitchen with a large cooking hearth, a dining area, and a sitting room with actual upholstered furniture clearly ordered from back east at considerable expense. A solid staircase led to the second floor. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Rebecca explained. "The water in the basin should still be warm if you'd like to freshen up before dinner." Clara was touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you. You've been very kind, especially on such short notice." "Nonsense," Rebecca replied with a smile. "It's a blessing having you here." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. The conversation flowed easily, with Tom and Rebecca doing most of the talking. Clara learned that Tom had been Samuel's friend during his trail driving days, and that he and Rebecca had been married for 3 years. "This will be our first child," Rebecca said, placing a hand on her rounded belly. "We lost one last year early on." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "That's partly why Sam was so insistent on finding help," Tom explained. "Doctor says Rebecca needs to rest more this time." Samuel, who had been quiet throughout the meal, looked up. "You'll start tomorrow, Miss Montgomery. Rebecca will show you what needs doing. If you need anything, just ask." After dinner, Clara helped Rebecca clear the table while the men went out to check on the livestock before turning in. As they washed the dishes together, Rebecca studied Clara with undisguised curiosity. "So, you came all the way from Boston to marry Harold Jenkins. How did that arrangement come about?" Clara explained about the correspondence that had begun through a matrimonial advertisement in a newspaper. His letters were so charming, so full of promise. He described his shop, the house he was building, all our future plans. Rebecca shook her head. Jenkins has a small dry goods store that's always on the verge of collapse. No house beyond the room above his shop. He must have been desperate to avoid his creditors to flee before you arrived. The confirmation of Harold's deception stung, but Clara was past tears now. I was foolish to stake everything on a stranger's promises. Not foolish, Rebecca corrected her. Hopeful, there's a difference. She dried her hands on her apron, and who knows, perhaps this disappointment will lead to something better. Clara smiled politely, not sharing Rebecca's optimism. For now, she was grateful simply to have a roof over her head and honest work to do. That night, in the small but comfortable bedroom, Clara unpacked her few belongings. Among them was the book of poetry with Samuel's wild rose pressed between its pages. She touched the dried petals gently, remembering his unexpected kindness at what had been her lowest moment. Outside her window, the vast Montana sky was alive with stars more than she had ever seen in her life. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara wondered what this new chapter would bring, and whether she could build something worthwhile from the ashes of her failed dreams. Morning came early at the Yates ranch. Clara woke to the sounds of activity downstairs, the clatter of cookware, men's voices, the back door opening and closing. Dressing quickly in her work clothes, she hurried down to the kitchen where she found Rebecca already preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Rebecca greeted her cheerfully. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Clara replied, tying an apron around her waist. "How can I help?" For the next hour, Clara worked alongside Rebecca, learning the rhythm of the household. She discovered that Samuel and Tom typically left at dawn to begin the day's work, returning mid-morning for a substantial breakfast. The ranch employed two other men brothers named Martinez, who lived in a small cabin near the corral, who sometimes joined them for meals. When the men came in for breakfast, they brought with them the smell of horses, leather, and fresh air. Samuel nodded a greeting to Clara as he washed up at the basin by the back door. She noticed how different he seemed here in his element, more relaxed, more sure of himself than he had appeared in town. "Miss Montgomery," he acknowledged. "Hope you're settling in." "Yes, thank you," she replied, setting a platter of flapjacks on the table. "Your home is very comfortable." The days quickly fell into a pattern. Clara rose early to help with breakfast, then spent the morning assisting Rebecca with household chores, laundry, cleaning, preserving food from the garden. In the afternoons, she often had time to herself while Rebecca rested, which she used to mend clothing or read from the small collection of books in the Yates home. Samuel remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but kept a certain distance. Sometimes Clara would catch him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her heart beat a little faster. When their paths crossed directly, his manner was always correct, even kind, but never familiar. One evening about 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, she was sitting on the front porch enjoying the cooler air after a hot day. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. She didn't hear Samuel approach until he spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, startling her slightly. Clara nodded. "I've never seen sunsets like these." He sat down on the porch steps, his hat in his hands. "Rebecca tells me you're a quick learner, says you've been a great help." "I'm glad," Clara replied. "She's been very patient with me." Samuel was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Might be forward of me to ask, but I've been wondering. Why would a city-bred lady like yourself agree to marry a man you'd never met in a place so different from what you're used to?" The question was indeed forward, but Clara sensed genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "My parents died 2 years ago, influenza. There was little left for me in Boston except memories. When Mr. Jenkins began writing, his letters painted such a vivid picture of life here. He wrote about building something meaningful together." She smiled ruefully. I suppose I was enchanted by the idea of a fresh start. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. A fresh start, I understand that well enough. What about you? Clara ventured. You've built all this, yet Rebecca mentioned you've never married. A shadow crossed his face. Came close once. Sarah was her name, daughter of a rancher near Helena. What happened? Clara asked softly when he didn't continue. Diphtheria. Winter of 71, we were to be married that spring. His voice was matter of fact, but Clara could hear the old pain beneath the words. I'm very sorry, she said, understanding now why he had shown her such kindness at the church. He knew what it was to have dreams shattered. Samuel shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. It was a long time ago. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Best get some rest, Miss Montgomery. Tom and I are driving some cattle to the north pasture tomorrow. We'll be gone overnight. Of course. Good night, Mr. Yates. As he walked away, Clara found herself watching his retreating figure with a strange sense of disappointment. Just when it seemed they might be moving beyond mere politeness, he had withdrawn again. The following day passed quickly, with Clara and Rebecca taking advantage of the men's absence to do a thorough cleaning of the house. As they worked, Rebecca shared stories of growing up with Samuel. He practically raised me after our parents died, she explained as they polished the dining room furniture. I was 12, Sam was 20. Our farm in Virginia was gone burned during the war. Sam brought us west, worked whatever jobs he could find to keep us fed. He must care for you very much, Clara observed. Rebecca smiled fondly. He's the best man I know, though he'd scoff to hear me say it, too modest for his own good and stubborn as a mule. Clara laughed. I've noticed that quality. Has he told you about Sarah? Rebecca asked suddenly. Clara nodded. Briefly last night, he said they were to be married. Rebecca sighed. It broke something in him when she died. He's never really looked at another woman since then, throws himself into the ranch work instead. She gave Clara a speculative glance. Until recently, that is. What do you mean? Clara asked, confused. I've seen how he watches you when he thinks no one's looking, Rebecca said with a knowing smile. And he actually talks to you. Sam can go days barely saying 10 words if left to himself. Clara felt her cheeks warm. I'm sure you're mistaken. Mr. Yates has been kind, but he's simply being a good employer. Rebecca looked unconvinced but dropped the subject, much to Clara's relief. The idea that Samuel might have any interest in her beyond her work was unsettling, not because it was unwelcome, but because it stirred feelings Clara had been trying to suppress since the moment he had handed her that wild rose. That evening, with only the women at home, they ate a light supper and retired early. Clara found it difficult to sleep, her mind spinning with thoughts of Samuel and the quiet moments they had shared. Was Rebecca right? Had she misinterpreted his reserved manner? Just before dawn, Clara was awakened by the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out her window, she saw Samuel and Tom returning, both looking exhausted and grimy from their work. Without thinking, she threw on her robe and hurried downstairs to put coffee on the stove. Samuel looked surprised to find her in the kitchen when he came in. Miss Montgomery, you're up early. I heard you return, she explained, suddenly self-conscious in her nightclothes and hastily donned robe. I thought you might appreciate some coffee. That's very thoughtful, he said, his voice rough with fatigue. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Been a long night. Coyotes spooked the herd twice. Clara poured him a cup of coffee and set it on the table. You should rest. I can prepare something for you to eat. Samuel accepted the coffee gratefully. No need, just this is plenty. He took a long sip, closing his eyes briefly in appreciation. When he opened them again, his gaze was direct, almost intense. Thank you, Clara. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected thrill through her. You're welcome, Samuel. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with something Clara couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. Then Tom came in, breaking the spell as he called a cheerful greeting and asked about breakfast. Over the next several weeks, something subtle shifted in Clara and Samuel's interactions. He began seeking her company in small ways, asking her to join him for coffee in the evenings, bringing her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range, offering to teach her to ride the gentle mare he'd chosen specifically for her use. "A lady should know how to ride out here," he explained as he adjusted the stirrups on the side saddle. "Might need to get somewhere when no wagon's available." Clara, who had only ridden in city parks on carefully led ponies, was nervous but determined. "I'm afraid I'll make a poor student." Samuel's smile was reassuring. "Daisy here's the gentlest horse on the ranch. She practically reads your mind. Just relax and trust her." Under his patient guidance, Clara soon gained confidence. Their riding lessons became a highlight of her week's opportunities to explore the beautiful ranch land and to spend time alone with Samuel, whose reserve gradually melted away during these outings. On a particularly beautiful September afternoon, they rode to a high meadow overlooking the valley. The aspen trees were beginning to turn gold, providing a stunning contrast against the deep green of the pines. Samuel spread a blanket on the grass and produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, and apples. "Rebecca packed it," he explained as they sat. "Said we deserved a proper outing." Clara smiled, suspecting Rebecca's matchmaking hand at work. "It's perfect. The view is magnificent." They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the warm sunshine and gentle breeze. Clara found herself studying Samuel's profile: the strong jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled, the way the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. "What is it?" he asked, catching her gaze. Clara blushed, embarrassed to be caught staring. "I was just thinking how different my life is now from what I expected when I came west." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Better or worse?" "Different," she repeated, "but not worse. I came seeking a husband and found employment instead, yet I've never felt more useful, more myself." "You've become indispensable," Samuel said quietly, "to the household, to Rebecca." Clara's heart quickened at what remained unsaid. "And to you," Samuel looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "Especially to me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, strong, and sent a current of awareness through her entire body. "Clara," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I know it hasn't been long and you came here with other expectations. But I find myself thinking about you from sunup to sundown. Your smile, your voice, the way you've brought life back into my home." Clara felt tears pricking her eyes. "Samuel, I'm not asking for promises," he continued hastily. "Just permission to court you properly. To see if what I'm feeling might be something you could share." Clara squeezed his hand, her heart full to bursting. "I already do share it. I've tried to tell myself it was foolish to develop feelings so soon after my disappointment with Harold, but the truth is, from the moment you handed me that rose, something inside me recognized you." Samuel's face transformed with a smile that took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to draw back, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Clara responded with a certainty that surprised herself, her hand rising to touch his cheek as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if she had finally found the place she truly belonged. "We should head back," Samuel said reluctantly, noticing the sun's position. "Rebecca will be wondering where we've gotten to." As they rode home side by side, Clara felt a happiness she had never experienced before. The disappointment that had brought her to this place now seemed like a blessing in disguise, the necessary detour that had led her to Samuel. Rebecca's knowing smile when they returned spoke volumes, but she said nothing beyond asking if they had enjoyed their ride. That evening, however, when Clara helped her prepare for bed, Rebecca squeezed her hand. "I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you," she said softly. "Not even Sarah." Clara's courtship with Samuel progressed swiftly after that day. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, and with it came the birth of Rebecca's son, a healthy boy they named William Samuel after both grandfathers. The arrival of the baby brought even more joy to the household and gave Clara the chance to prove her worth, as she took over most of the household duties while Rebecca recovered. Samuel, watching Clara rock his newborn nephew to sleep one evening, approached her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. "You're natural with him," he observed softly. "Ever think about having children of your own?" Clara nodded, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "I've always wanted a family. It was part of what made Harold's letters so appealing, his talk of building a home filled with children." Samuel took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking, Clara. This courtship has been the happiest time of my life, but I find I'm growing impatient." "Impatient," she echoed, her pulse quickening. "What I mean to say is," he continued, dropping to one knee beside her chair, "I love you, Clara Montgomery. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing alone in that church, so brave despite your broken heart. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Clara's eyes. "Yes, Samuel, yes, with all my heart." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with a pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Rebecca insisted I should have it for this purpose." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara was struck by how perfectly it fit both the ring and the man before her. This was no fantasy built on letters and imagination, but a love grown from shared experiences, from learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, from building trust day by day. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where they had first met. This time, Clara walked down the aisle with no hesitation, her bouquet made of wild roses Samuel had spent hours gathering from the hillsides around the ranch. Rebecca served as her bridesmaid, little William sleeping peacefully in Tom's arms as they witnessed the ceremony. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a passion that caused a few raised eyebrows among the townsfolk who had gathered for the occasion. Clara, radiant in a new dress of pale blue, silk a wedding gift from Samuel, couldn't bring herself to care about propriety in that perfect moment. The winter that followed was the happiest of Clara's life. She and Samuel settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Their small disagreements, inevitable when two strong-willed people share a life, were always resolved with respect and often ended in laughter. Their nights were filled with discoveries of each other that left them breathless and ever more deeply in love. By spring, Clara had news of her own to share. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she placed Samuel's hand on her still flat stomach. "We'll need to prepare a nursery," she said softly, "for a November baby." The wonder that spread across Samuel's face was something Clara knew she would remember until her dying day. He gathered her in his arms, his voice thick with emotion. "A baby, our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he answered, kissing her tenderly. "When I think how close I came to not riding into town that day," Clara shuddered at the thought. Providence had other plans for us both. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, Samuel's arm around Clara's shoulders, her head resting against him. The ranch stretched before them, their home, their future, the legacy they would build together. "I never told you," Samuel said suddenly, "why I brought you that rose at the church." Clara looked up at him curiously. "I assumed it was simply kindness." He shook his head. "My father once told me that when he met my mother, she was standing alone at a social gathering, looking lost. He picked a gardenia from a nearby arrangement and gave it to her, said it was the best decision he ever made." Samuel's voice softened with memory. "When I saw you there, so brave despite everything, I knew I had to do the same." Clara reached up to touch his face, marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. A bride abandoned, A cowboy with a rose and the beginning of a love story neither had expected but both now cherished beyond measure. "Thank you for the rose," she whispered, "and for your name. They're the two greatest gifts I've ever received." As stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Samuel kissed his wife again, sealing their bond and their promise of a future filled with love. The disappointment that had brought Clara west had been transformed into the greatest blessing of her life, a reminder that sometimes the end of one dream is simply the beginning of a better one.